I'm Mordechai Shechter. I'm now the president of Tel Chai Academic College, by the way, for the guests here. While the name university is a protected brand name in the Israeli higher education system, college is not. You have college for nails and college for barmen and everything of that sort. But the term academic college is a protected brand name, and only those who are accredited by the Council of Higher Education and to give degrees, academic degrees, can be called academic colleges. I'm the president. I'm on loan from my universities, one of the 7 research universities, the University of Haifa, where I served in past also as a rector of the university. So I'm familiar, I guess, with both systems, the colleges and the universities. Our moderators, of course, Professor Harman, you know, you heard him just now, and most of you, if not all of you, know Menachem Yaari himself, who is now the president of the Israeli Academy of Sciences, the epitome, the apex of the Israeli research establishment in this positive sense, distinguished professor of economics at the Hebrew University, but he was also president of the Open University, which is the other side. It's called a university, but actually it is open to anybody who wants to pursue higher education, even if you don't have a high school matriculation degree. Now, I want to dwell upon, I would like us to dwell upon a term which has been used to describe what was said in this, in the various talks today. And the term is called institutional drift. This is a reflection of the transition to best higher education. And process has been, I guess, repeated in many countries, at least in the Western world, if not else. The process is whereby, with increased number of students, you establish additional new institutions, usually colleges, start with first degrees, and those colleges, as some of the speakers refer to, try to upgrade themselves, either by themselves or through the government help or whatever, and then they start granting second degree and eventually maybe even PhDs, and they turn themselves into universities. Some of the processes are intrinsic or autonomous in a way, and some of them are imposed from above, like in the UK system, where many of the polytechnic in one day became universities. Now, this is something that a concern that was reflected in what Shechter talked today about, and what Yortner report talked about, the fear that because of this increased number of colleges and some acts of the Council of Higher Education, like granting the permission for colleges to grant a master's degree, a master's degree with a thesis, research thesis, will turn all the 53 colleges into mediocre or even less third-class universities, and the concern is real. And not only that, because of this drift, institutional drift, what would happen is that many of the good part of the budget which now goes to universities will be slowly and gradually transferred to colleges. Some universities, you can hear it now very often, that part of the wars of the research universities are due to the establishment of the colleges. We took a chunk of the budget from the universities, and this is one reason, and one explanation, some say a very major explanation, for the serious budgetary situation in which the research universities have found themselves. Whether this is true or not, that's not the point. The point is, what do we do about it? And this is what I would like to dwell upon in this session. And we were given 2 nice examples. Some of that will be repeated later on today and tomorrow. One of them is the California scheme, the 3-tier system with an open dialogue between the 3 tiers, but very well established demarcation lines, what each tier, community colleges, state universities, and research universities, University of California, are supposed to do or can do, but with a free movement, relatively free movement of students. The other extreme we have just heard is Australian example, whereby through a very wise system of incentives rather than impose a system from above, use incentives in order to create a multifaceted system of research-led and teaching-led. I like the term, Leslie. I think that's more appropriate even for Israel, because the colleges in Israel also engage in research, not only the universities, by the way. And the system flourishes through this kind of openness on one hand, but it is led by a clear vision of policy. Now, we can in Israel continue to muddle through. I think we shouldn't learn. And I apologize for our Italian guest, but we saw that, in Italy, a very ambitious aim. I mean, they wanted to decrease the number of universities from 22 to 4, and didn't work out. But even less ambitious schemes apparently didn't work out in Italy. We can continue to muddle through. We can think about establishing a Chinese wall, a la the California system, but a very rigid wall between the various tiers of the higher education system, and say this is what colleges can do, this is what universities do, this is, and you shouldn't veer left and right from this scheme. I don't believe it will work. I don't believe it will work because we simply, or maybe we have missed the train. But just to give you an example, Shechter in his opening speech, I remember I noted points 3 and 4. I remember that. One of them was talked about open dialogue between universities and colleges. The other one, the free movement, like in the California system, between the various tiers. When a student from college in Israel now, with a BA or BSc degree, which is exactly equivalent by law to one which is being granted by university, many of them still, when they apply for graduate studies at universities, are discriminated against. If you come from a college, by the very fact that you come from a college, you have to take additional courses versus or compared to somebody who comes from the university. This is our nature, apparently. This is our culture. When I approached my home university, and after a decision of the Council of Higher Education to encourage second degrees offered by colleges in association with universities, so not in competition, with association, I approached my home university, my mother university, University of Haifa, and asked that Tel Hai College and the University of Haifa will jointly offer a degree. I was sneered. That's not a dialogue. And the reason is there was a fear that we will compete. I mean, how can we compete if we do it together? So I don't believe that the system, although for a long time I believe that this is what we should do, I think we have, on the other hand, the Australian system. And the Australian system offers a much more benign and open and flexible scheme. It probably fits more our cultural environment and the way we do things. And the question is, should we now, being at the crossroad, and I agree with Ze'ev, it's a moment of truth for the Israeli higher education system, with the encouragement and the leadership of our Council of Higher Education and the Planning and Budgeting Committee, decide now, before it's too late, before we continue to muddle through and we cannot go back upon one of these two roads, which of course adapted to the Israeli cultural and social environment. With a clear message, and I liked what Nava Ben-Zvi said, there are different forms of excellence. There is not only one form of excellence. I think this is something that we should remember all through. Nobody has a monopoly on excellence. And if with this open mind, I would like to ask our guest first, Professor Harman.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It seems to me that with the expansion of higher education systems, this leads to a greater diversity of students. That in many cases has been associated with new demands from various professions and employers for groups that didn't have university education before, or degree education, for that to be offered. And higher education systems, I think, have responded in different ways. One way is for a university sector to try to expand and become more diverse, more varied in offerings and approaches. Although that has its problems, often there's considerable rigidities in traditional systems. The other alternative, which has been popular in a number of countries, is to create new sectors, either of sub-degree, offering less than a degree, or even initially starting with degree studies and often moving into master studies. Both strategies, I think, do have difficulties and are not ideal solutions. Particularly with binary systems, there's often status considerations that are very important. The word university carries very considerable status compared to college. There's problems in terms of defining the roles of universities in relation to colleges, problems about students and the ability of students to move from one kind of institution to another. And my perspective is that binary systems tend often to be unstable. Now, California, to my mind, is a very special case in that I think the master plan was anchored in the Constitution, and so it's not easy to change. But other countries have grappled in different ways with this experience with binary systems. I tried to explain the Australian experience, something that happened that wasn't expected. In fact, the year before the decision was taken to abolish the binary system, we had a government committee that reported and said, well, we should keep the binary system. It's got problems, but, we think it's best to keep it. We heard about the UK experience. The difference between the UK and Australia is that we combined the end of the binary systems with a regrouping of institutions to try to build larger institutions, whereas I understand it, the UK essentially existing polytechnics and other kinds of institutions were given the right to use the word education. South Africa is an interesting case. They have universities, and for the last 20 years they've had technicons, which to me sound very like some of the colleges here. They're going through an interesting experience at the moment because they've gone in for major mergers, which have been initiated partly to deal with the results of apartheid, of different kinds of institutions for different ethnic and racial groups, and also the problems of the former black universities that were located in isolated areas, and of course once students could go to any kind of institutions, well-qualified young blacks want to go to the prestigious institutions. And so they have a problem. They've done mergers, they've created some new kind of institutions which are partly university and partly technicon, and now are they going to belong to the university sector or the college sector? So there's another example of a higher education system, a binary system which is under great stress. Another is New Zealand. New Zealand has kept a binary system, but one of the senior colleges was allowed to become a university. The next one in the queue, in fact, changed its name, and it's called Unitech, but it's been stopped becoming a university. So this is a great sort of source of friction in South Africa. A very different case is Ireland. Ireland has had a recent review. The institutes of technology made the case that they should become universities, but the answer is no for the time being. We'll keep the system as it is. So I think there is a problem in terms of binary systems, that unless you anchor something in the Constitution or unless you get a very strong consensus in the society, this is the kind of arrangement you want, there are difficulties, particularly as college sectors expand in size. Often they become much larger than university sectors, research universities. They recruit PhDs, young people with expectations. They'd like to do at least, well, they're keen to teach, but I'd like to do some research to keep up my interests. The demands of students, the demands of communities. So I think we do have a problem in a number of societies, not just this society.
Thank you very much. Enough.
Thank you. I'll do it from there if I may. Hi, I'm sorry. I wasn't aware that I was supposed to speak, give introductory comments. So I'll just speak extemporaneously. I'll ad-lib, and it's going to show in the fluency of what I'm going to say, so I apologize for that. But I want to zero in on my concerns, or the way I interpret the real concerns regarding the recent developments in higher education in Israel, because this morning we did hear two of the most prominent representatives of higher education in Israel, and they seemed very concerned. They seemed, you might say that their presentations were, they were complaining about developments, that they were anxious, they were even scandalized maybe by what happened, and to some it may have seemed a little bit excessive that one should feel like that. And I'd like to throw my own flashlight on what's happened recently in higher education in Israel, and maybe justify a little bit the sense of anxiety that came through this morning in the presentations of my colleagues and friends, Zev and Yoshua. And I basically see two major developments which are very disconcerting, that are part and parcel of what happened in higher education in the last couple of years. And I would say that one of them is a constitutional concern, and the other one is a structural concern. And I'd like to, if I may, take a couple of minutes on each one of them to spell these out for you, and maybe that will explain the sense of concern that that has come through in earlier presentations. The constitutional concern that I feel very strongly is that a division within the Ministry of Finance of the State of Israel, not even the ministry itself, the budget division of the Ministry of Finance of the State of Israel, somehow finds itself in a position to introduce reforms in this country. A division of a ministry introduces reforms in higher education, which is what we've been discussing, but not only in higher education. The budget division knows how to run Social Security better than anyone else, so they introduce a reform in Social Security, not the Ministry of Welfare or anyone who you'd think has something to say about this. They know how to run a health system, so they introduce a reform in Israel's health system, not the Ministry of Health, the budget division of the Ministry of Finance. I find that very, and in other fields as well, there are about a dozen or more reforms that have been suggested by the, and not only that, I mean, you'd think that in order to institute such reforms, you need legislation. It's the legislature, it's the Knesset that ought to be doing this thing. Well, yeah, you'd be right, but the budget division of the Ministry of Finance has been given a legislative tool called the Law of Arrangements, Chok HaEsderim. Wonderful. So now there is this one piece of government that's not even elected that introduces reform and has a legislative tool by which to institute these reforms and legislate them into law. I find that extremely disconcerting, and in particular, since I'm in higher education, I find it disconcerting in the higher education context. Now, in higher education, you know, for all I know, I haven't studied it. I have my views on that. But let's assume, just for the sake of argument, that the measures they took are excellent, wonderful, are just the right thing for the institutions of higher learning. But what have they done? They have dictated to the institutions of higher learning, to the universities, to the Weizmann Institute, it wasn't necessary, and not so much to the Technion, but to most of the institutions. They've dictated their constitutions, and they've dictated their bylaws. I mean, that's, I think that's unheard of, that a government, that a division within a ministry comes out and dictates how an institution like, let's say, the Hebrew University should write its own constitution. That's something that if the audience here felt a little bit of a sense of alarm when my colleagues here spoke, I think this is a good reason to be alarmed. Now the other, and I'll be short on that, the other element that I'm concerned about is the basic misunderstanding of what an academic system is. The attempt to impose on an academic system a hierarchy or a hierarchical structure. In other words, look at how business is run. Business is based on a hierarchy. Somebody higher on the hierarchy should be able to extract from somebody lower in the hierarchy whatever they need to see from them, and that's that. And it's been proved effective in business, and it's been proved effective in the military, and surely it will be effective in higher education. Well, that's just not the case. Higher education, particular institutions of higher learning, are not hierarchical. The whole system of authority within academia is lateral rather than hierarchical, and that's in other words, the source of authority. If I say have any bedal of authority attached to me, it's not because somebody up on a certain hierarchy gave that to me, or that in the cause of being a member of a hierarchy I got that. It's because my colleagues laterally have endowed that to me, or I'm endowed in this way by my colleagues. So the whole system, when you talk about higher learning, when you talk about research, when you talk about higher education, is by its own nature, by its very nature, not hierarchical but lateral. And I think that's a point that much of the system in Israel misses. And as long as they don't come to terms with this very basic structural fact, we're going to see divergence of interest between those who are doing higher education and the state, and that is to say, those who are paying for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Menachem. And you see, this is academic freedom, of course, I have to talk about. We have a special session tomorrow called Government, Academia, Society Relations, and this is something that you have just addressed to. So I still would like us to go back and follow what we have discussed this afternoon and this morning, the expanding higher education system, the expanding access to tertiary education, and the name of this session is a look into the future, rather than dwell on the form of government intervention in academia, which is very disconcerting and, of course, deserve a discussion. So at least I'm trying to veer back to the theme that I thought would be appropriate for this evening. Okay, before I continue, no, don't apologize. It's academic freedom. Somebody lost a cellular phone. Check. I was asked to show it to everybody because we don't know whose it is. All right, I will write down the names. I see Guri, okay, and Reichman. And Guri Zilka. Okay, Guri Metzer. There are microphones, so please use the microphone and introduce yourself, because they are recording these sessions, I understand.
My name is Gorion Meltzer, and I don't know exactly what I'm doing here, but on my sign I see that I'm on the advisory board of the Nieman Institute, so let it be so. After hearing all the lectures this morning, to which I cannot say that I agree, I do suggest to change the topic, not what can we expect, because expect is a very passive type. What can we do, and this is a positive type. And this was done by Professor Kenan, who proposed a certain structure of the Vera. I don't know if it's good or bad because I'm not part of a university, but I think that a decision should be taken whether to implement it, and if to implement it, it should be implemented soon. So I would suggest what can we not expect, but do. The rest of the things I will leave for later or other opportunity.
Professor Reichman? Sham.
I would like to take issue with Professor Tadmor and Professor Yortner. I think that they do not clearly see the development and the major changes that happen in our society. Their proposition was straightforward. The research universities need more resources. If we recognize the colleges as universities, those resources will not be available for the universities. It's basically the thesis. Insofar as resources, we have to understand that the resources dry out all over the world for higher education. Insofar as the Israeli GDP, Israel is perhaps one of the first places in the world in allocating money for higher education. When compared to the resources invested in high schools and elementary education vis-à-vis higher education, we'll see again a disparity in Israel more than other places. We are in a bad situation economically, and therefore it is expected that the resources will be less available. It's happening all over the world. In Australia, we heard it was reduced further down, less than 50%. In the United States, the state universities fund the universities by about 30–35% at best, and so it goes. So it is a matter, and as Guri said, and I agree with him, the question that we should ask ourselves is, what should we do on our own initiative in order to raise sufficient funds to go ahead? And there are many ways that can be approaches. Some of you heard what is happening in Australia and in other places. There are many ways in which we should go. In any case, to create this artificial distinction between colleges and universities is an ill-taken approach. First, there is a blur it was said by, I believe, by Professor Tadmor, that we should support research universities and not research institutions. Well, we have a wonderful example of the Weizmann Institute, which is mainly a research institute, and the education is secondary to enormous accomplishments by supporting a research institute. If we want to support research, let us support research. To the point, not the university, but to the point. If you want to support research, it should be on a competitive basis and to the point, and not funnel the sums of money into a university, which will end up in various places rather than to the points that you are interested in funneling the money. So research money should be competitive, regardless of the name of the institutes that has it. I would like to mention that not all the universities, or not all the so-called research universities, have the same level. Some of them have weaker departments, and some of them are wonderful, as we know. So to lump them together is a mistake, as well as to lump all the colleges together. In certain areas, not necessarily in life sciences and let's say in engineering and so on, but in social sciences, the colleges sometimes have a much higher level of research than the universities. And the reason is very simple. Most of the leading professors at the colleges left the universities for various reasons, which I have no time to dwell on, left the universities and went to the colleges. And by the very fact that they left the university and are working for a college, it doesn't change their ability of conducting research. So it is very artificial. And most of the so-called research universities, professors, are not familiar what is happening in many of the colleges. It's a very high-level faculty that is doing it. So I would say, insofar as education is concerned, we should differentiate between research and education. Research, I spoke about how it should be funded. Education should be funded by providing a higher education basket that should be granted to every young Israeli who wants to continue his education to get a higher education. And on top of it, loans should be available. And every university should receive the freedom to act independently, determine the tuition, and compete in the market. Let me just finish with the following remark. The world is changing. We are in a competitive market. Competition is good also for higher education. And it is wrong to rely on what was happening in the past and not look into the future. We are facing a very competitive market in higher education. And it should be based on equal opportunity and equal footing to everybody to compete. The so-called research universities have a wonderful advantage, and they can do very well in a competitive market. But to sit and wait for government creates the very inferiority and the very subordination that we all want to get out of. So let's decrease the power of government by taking our future into our own hands, competing in the market, doing other things, and then there will be less complaints about the encroachment of politicians.
Thank you, Professor Reichman. For the sake of truth, Professor Reichman is president of one of the leading private colleges in Israel. Guri Zilka. Guri is a former Director General of the Council of Higher Education and the Planning and Budgeting Committee.
Thank you. A comment and a question. I would say in my past experience, one that was involved deeply in expanding the system in the beginning of the 90s with the influx of immigrants and the growing number of students coming from the secondary schools in Israel, that this expansion would not take place unless diversifying the system. And we can see it in many other countries that were represented here, that diversity is the key issue. But diversity without boundaries, diversity that goes a long way with maintaining quality in universities and establishing good colleges. One of the sectors that was missing in the presentations that was given here was the private sector, but not only the private sector, the non-profit private sector, but rather the private sector for profit, which is not represented in Israel, but is very vibrant sector in some countries like the United States. As far as I recall, there are about 400 institutions for profit in the United States. Some of them are for distant learning. Some of them are universities, and we have a lot of examples. 10 years ago, there were only dozens of them. So this is a sector that helps diversity, helps in expansion. So maybe this could be a trigger to the problems we are facing. My question is to the Australian, our Australian colleague, Professor Hartman, what is the reason when the amalgamation took place in the beginning of the 90s in Australia, coming from 60-plus institutions to 37 institutions, or 36 institutions, why did the government from Canberra took over without any buffer, like the HEFCA in the UK? Thank you.
Would you like to? Yeah, please.
It's a good question. I think the reason was that the minister at the time wasn't convinced that the performance of the agency we had, it was called the Commonwealth Tertiary Education Commission, which was responsible for universities, colleges of advanced education, and technical and further education. He wasn't convinced that it was sufficiently responsive to the needs of the society, and I think essentially he wanted the capacity to set the directions for the sector in a more direct way. What he did was to create a new division in the Ministry of Education with new officials who were in sympathy with his thinking. There was a certain amount of opposition from people in universities, but curiously, after a few months of opposition and discussion, that topic hasn't been discussed again. And so, the general feeling in the university sector is that current arrangements seem to work reasonably well.
את המיקרופון, איפה המיקרופון? תביא לי יעקב. לא, מאחורייך.
יעקב אירם, בר-אילן University. I assume that all of us will agree with the great diagnosis made in this morning by Professor Tadmor. The higher education system in Israel is indeed in a moment of truth, and with Professor Yortner's follow-up, that there are signals, grave signals, then to endanger, that might endanger the Israeli higher education system. I would also agree that if we do not ask ourselves what can be done, but what can we expect, we can expect more of the same and even worse. The situation will deteriorate if we don't get into a dialogue, and a keen dialogue between all the different sectors within the Israeli Israeli higher education system. A keen dialogue does not mean the type of dialogue that we were engaged with in the last decade, where mainly the universities, naturally so, maybe rightfully so, had a paternalistic paternalistic dialogue with the colleges. For example,
I wouldn't call that a dialogue if it's a paternalistic.
Okay, no, it's a certain dialogue, because the universities, all of us know, monologue. All of us know that the universities have contributed very much to the flourishing of the colleges. Those colleges were considered to be, who were called at that time as regional colleges. Most of the universities, most of the universities in Israel have encouraged, have opened and supported the regional colleges. And Bar Ilan example, for example, up to these days has 4, 5 some kind of extension colleges. But this is the type of what I've called, maybe paternalistic is not the right term, but it's not on an equal footing. That is my fair and dialogue. I mean both the universities, the colleges, and the for-profit, quote unquote, or private colleges in Israel, because all of us, all these 3 sectors are actually in the same area and compete for the same funds, for the same student population, and so on and so on. So we have to engage in this type of dialogue, and the 3 major examples that we have heard, namely the Californian master plan, the British example, and the Australian one, none of them, unfortunately, cannot set a pure example for the Israeli educational system. All of us who are engaged in any type of comparative study know that you cannot adopt a system, because every system is embedded in its historical circumstances, economical, sociological, cultural, religious, and so forth. We cannot adopt any one of these 3 systems. But when we can adapt some of them, and actually all 3 of them, elements from all 3 of them, in order to improve, in order to cope with the current crisis in Israeli higher education, and we'll have, in order to cope realistically with this crisis, we'll have, willing or unwilling, to redefine some of the basic missions that we thought of, and as the major missions of the university. I think I'll stop at this.
Yaakov, just a question. Do you think really that one can mix together the California master plan and the Australian approach? I mean, wouldn't that be half coffee and half tea?
No, one cannot mix together. What I have said, that we can adapt, we can take out elements, and maybe in another opportunity we'll have to discuss it further. Okay. Elements from the master plan, from the British experience, from the Australian, and I'm not too much familiar with the Italian. Yes, we cannot adopt fortunately, unfortunately, the California system is embedded in California. I don't know, Sheldon, you'll tell us, was it adopted in any other state in the United States? If it's so successful, why didn't Illinois or Pennsylvania adopt it? Okay, they say
you want to answer him? Just a quick answer. Yeah.
Well, I had to say something before, and that is one reason you might not want to adopt it is that it is not grant in the California Constitution. It's statute law. That means it can be changed, and for 40 years it's been under attack. So it's pretty vulnerable, and we could go into that another day. The various states have different systems, and they come out of different traditions. The California one was the first state after the war to really conceive of the higher education system of the state as a total entity, and it included the private sector in that as well. And other states came along with master plans later, and there are variations on that theme. But some state governments are as intrusive in the daily affairs of the universities as anywhere else in the world, Wisconsin, for example.
Before we proceed, sir, I'm sorry.
But one other point, what is in the California Constitution is the University of California. It is named in the Constitution as virtually a 4th branch of government, and that has given it the kind of protection that Grant has mentioned, but it has not made it impervious to political attack.
Mm-hmm. I would like one more sentence.
Please.
the quarrel, I think it looks like from those who are outside, the quarrel, quote unquote, of the term university, universita, it's a major issue. Should colleges be called universita, I don't know, Raf Campusit or Universita Ezorit and so on? I think we have, it seems maybe it will sound naive, I think the right term for it in the direct translation of university in Hebrew is Michlala.
Oh.
Kolel, Kaf Lamed.
We are willing to trade. The Michlалот will become universities.
I mean, no, etymologically, a Michlala. I mean, no, it's a uni, it's not a polyversity university, but it includes every around. So maybe that's a long-term idea to think of.
Before I will address the ones who raised their hand. We have the benefit here of the present, Shlomo, I'm coming to you, the present chairman of the Planning and Budgetary Committee, and a former chairman, Chaim Harari, Professor Chaim Harari. Would you mind, Chaim, to say a few words on this topic? It would be interesting since you were involved in the beginning of the expansion of the system.
I prefer to say tomorrow morning when I'm delivering a show.
Some people will not be here, so
well,
give us a preview.
What? I cannot give a preview. I can give a promo.
A promo, yeah.
Basically, what I would say in connection with the discussion today is that I did not hear almost any discussion of resources which can serve the university system other than government support. Tuition was mentioned here and there. The income from intellectual property, which is, in my opinion, an enormous future aspect of universities and anyone who is doing research in science, engineering, medicine, is a very important component. The whole aspect of philanthropy has changed very dramatically in the last 2 decades in all countries in which philanthropy is playing a very important role, which means everywhere except mostly in Europe. And all of these aspects are allowing the creation of diversity of academic institutions based on a diversity of sources of income. In other words, governments have to be more or less egalitarian. Governments cannot discriminate in a very big way between different institutions of higher learning because a student is a student and every student is a citizen. Government can discriminate between places which do first-class research and places which do not do research on the basis of individual research evaluation. But there are many other factors that allow one institution to be much better than another, and we should also pay attention to them. And only by having a sort of an integration of all of these aspects and all of these factors, we can create a system which really ranges from the very best to, let's say, brutally, the very worst. And anybody who thinks that there can be a system in which all the universities and all the institutions of higher learning are excellent, of course, is totally mistaken. If everybody has the same level, then everybody is mediocre. There is no other way. The average is the average. And the big difference between the European continental system and the American system is that America has the best universities in the world, but also the worst universities in the world. And Europe has a huge number of universities, almost none of which is excellent and almost none of which is terrible. And I think we have to decide whether we go one way or the other. And I would vote for the American direction, because otherwise we do not have the excellence. And the price you have to pay for it is also to have some institutions of higher learning which are really second-rate. And let's not pretend that everything can be excellent, because this is not correct. This is the promo. This is not the lecture.
Thank you very much. I infer that you agree to some extent, at least, with what Professor Reichman voiced. Shlomo, would you like to say something? Could you pass the microphone here to down here, to the present chairman of the PCB?
Okay, I would like to comment on a few things, and I will start first with the comments that made by Menachem and by my friends Yoshua and Zeev concerning the interference of the government in higher institution. We cannot change history. As Zeev pointed out, the Maltz report was on the table of the universities for many years, and also on the table of the Council for Higher Education. And then the government really did, I think, a very wrong decision, בחוק ההסדרים, I mean, that, you know, trying to, let's say, to steal a law. And the Council and the VATAT, not PBC, but VATAT, really opposed it, and this, I mean, they rejected the government decision. And the Council for Higher Education appointed a committee composed of members from the Council for Higher Education, rectors of universities and other representative universities, and we discussed the subject with Senate members, presidents, rectors, and finally we came to the structure which is more or less resembles Maltz reports, and it was accepted by the universities. Sure, there was an interference by the government, but it was controlled by the Council and the VATAT. So this is the correct situation, and I think that when we face the alternative, and the alternative was relatively very bad because there was not an agreement with the government, and we know that few universities really has a very significant deficit in the budget. So I think our decision was right, and I think that we saved the higher education system in general. Now, again, going back to the discussions that we have now. I think we have here, we cannot deny, we have two sectors. We have two sectors operating in Israel. One is the universities and the other is the non-universities institution. And I'm not referring now to the private institution. I'm referring to the budgeted institution. And we have limited sources. When I say we, I mean the VATAT. So we have to see how can we really proceed with these two sectors, trying to excel both in teaching and research. And no doubt the universities has the infrastructure for research. The colleges mainly don't have the infrastructure for research. Professor Reichman is right in the way that few professors, or some professors who really joined the colleges have a very strong background of research. It's true, but they don't have the infrastructures in the colleges for running the research. And we need the infrastructure. So, and VATAT doesn't have any extra money to support, to establish new infrastructure. So we have to see what we have. We have the universities, and Professor Harari is right. I mean, we have good sections in universities, and some of them are not so good, and everybody knows what kind of departments are good and what departments in each university are not so good. And we are trying to do our best to allocate the money for research based on competition. We are referring to publications, and not publication as publication, with impact factors. So it means we are trying to budget what we called excellent. And we are budgeting according to the funds that the university can get from abroad. And we are referring to postdoctoral students who are involved in research. So we are doing our best to, I would say, to define what is excellence in research and to divide the money to this sector. And, as I said, we now establish the quality assurance unit, which will follow both research and teaching, teaching also in the colleges. And we know that we have very good colleges in Israel, again, and we have some colleges that should make efforts to improve and to become good colleges. So here we are funding the teaching. And we cannot fund research in colleges. It's very simple, and we don't have the sources for it. However, we have the ISF, the Israeli Science Foundation, which Vatat is funding, and this foundation is open for all researchers in Israel. So we know that good scientists from colleges also apply to this foundation, as they are getting, funds, and which allows them to really run the research if they have the infrastructure that can allow them to do this research. So, in my view, we have to continue supporting these two sectors, and as was said here, should be a dialogue between these two sectors. The Vatat and the Council can give the umbrella for this dialogue. And this is the situation as it stands now, and I believe it will be till at least the end of the multi-year agreement with the government. And as I said before in my presentation, we should look for other sources for getting, more allocations for the higher education in Israel.
תודה. שם למעלה. אני לא מכיר את השם. אוקיי, אלכס, אתה הרחמת את היד? כן, בסדר. ומאיר? שם טוב. משה, אני ארצה שאתה תגיד גם כמה מילים. אני אבוא אליך. בבקשה, תציג את עצמך.
My name is Dan Zilberstein. I'm from the Technion. I wanted to make two comments on Professor Reichmann's words. First, basic research cannot be open to the market. It will become an applied research. This is why in most Western countries, basic research is funded by national and international foundations and not a money system, like market system. And therefore we should keep asking a government to support, and our government to support basic research, because then it will remain basic research. Number two, the Weizmann Institute, although it is called a research institute, most of the research is done by students there. And therefore it is a university of graduate students.
Thank you. Alex? כאן למטה. תתחלקו בעבודה, שלא את תרוצי רק. כאן למטה בשורה השנייה.
I'd like to ask our Australian
Alex, please introduce yourself first.
Alex Kenan, Hebrew University of Jerusalem and Israel Academy. I would like to ask our Australian friend. I understand that Australian experience is not a very long one, but could you say a few words? What exactly was the effect of this restructuring of the university system on the research output or the ability of Australia to compete in research with other countries? Thank you.
I think initially there were some difficulties for the major research universities. The government decided to give an amount of about 5% of the operating grant competitively on research, and looking back, I don't think that was sufficient. If you compare that to the UK, what the Higher Education Funding Council of England does is about 20% of the operating grant funds are based on research performance, and it means that the leading research-intensive universities get probably more money from the research exercise than from teaching. However, that's been corrected, and we have a new formula to give money for research training and research infrastructure. In addition, in the last decade, very substantial research money has been allocated to the sector. It's been done competitively, and so the research-intensive universities have collected at least 3/4 of those funds. So looking back, I think although there were some initial difficulties about funding formula, I think the research-intensive universities have done very well in the system.
Thank you.
Meir Tzadok, I'm from the academy. I'm, I guess, the oldest working, living piece since '72 has been involved in the Planning and Grants Committee and later the academy. One thing, I asked myself what's the value added of having conferences of this nature, but to our guests, one thing is certain, at least it's bringing the Israelis together to talk to each other. And we have here, which is a very rare example, by the way, we have here people from the Treasury, we have people from the Planning and Grants Committee, the Academy, universities, and so on. And I guess it's one of the first time after the Batat got the long-term planning that there was some discussion that were open, at least, associated with the plan. One thing that bothers me all along, and I think its headline is Transition to Mass Higher Education, and we are trying to refrain from being mass higher education here. What we are dealing all the time on structures, institutions, and so on. I think all of us are having only part of the picture. In order to understand, for example, what went wrong in the British system, the research has always been hidden somewhere or another, how research is being funded, and again, quantities of money on competitive basis that goes to universities. This is kind of a black hole. We don't exactly, this is not coming as part of the discussion, and it's, I think it's also creates some kind of misunderstanding about the British system, for example, and we had here Leslie Wagner presenting it, and when we followed, Israel followed the British system, at that time, and still it's true again, 2/3 of the budgets to universities is coming through FK, or previously the Planning and Grants Committee. 1/3 is coming from Research Council. 1/3 of the budget, competitive. We don't have. And I think too late in the history of evolution of higher education, we established the ISF. Comparatively speaking, $1.5 billion goes to higher education from total sources, and competitive money from ISF, which is open to all, is about $50 million. So, and this was done by the universities. There was no decision of master plan coming from the government with incentives to try and change the evolution. It was something, again, which the universities and the Planning and Grants Committee and the DOM, the academic staff, decided to do it themselves from their own resources. Although we are getting increase, but this is marginal increase. The major change, again, comparative to other systems, and what worries is, of course, how do you maintain research, how do you maintain excellence when you have increase of students who want to come to universities and maintain excellence. I don't think it's not just a structural question, but how much money, who allocates it mainly, and to what extent it's competitive or not. Structural changes, whether they are universities, colleges, are really important. There's always a tendency, and we see it here, governments go to uniformity and egalitarian, and it works against the research university as they exist.
And it's hard for a researcher to ask for more money on an egalitarian basis. But part of the whole thing is that we are talking about something that is not, so to speak, democratic or egalitarian. And it's, I think maybe the next day, tomorrow, we have to try and see where the research part, how it works, how do you create differentiation in spite of structural changes. And the good example is that, I hope I'm not touching on Torsten Niebaum's point, but Israel and Sweden were two exceptions in the diagram that Professor Jorkner presented. Israel, I think, is stable so far, and there were many, many reforms, and we'll hear about it, I guess, from Torsten tomorrow in Sweden. Still, Sweden is performing very well, so what makes changes and why we are concerned, I think, is still a puzzled question. Thank you.
Thank you. Pass it behind you.
Joseph Bodenheimer, Jerusalem College of Technology. I'd like to point out that you cannot have excellence without diversity. In order to have excellence, you have to be able to judge. And I think one of the powerful tools that academia has, it has a system of judging excellence, whether it's by referees, as is done by the ISF, or by other methods. And I think that the same is true for institutions and departments within institutions. I think that the suggestion of the Council of Higher Education, or VATAT, to divide the whole academic system into a binary system, where there are only two steps, one is universities and the other is other than universities, is artificial, and I don't think it works in favor of excellence. I am sure, and I know as a fact, that there are certain departments in colleges which are on a higher standard than the same departments at universities. I would even go so far as to say that there are some colleges where research is being done on a higher level than certain departments at universities, but they are not funded in the same way. I think that VATAT should not make its job too easy, excuse me, Shlomo, but should really evaluate the quality. And we've already heard that there are different forms of excellence, but quality should be evaluated in each institution and funding should be awarded accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you. Moshe. מאחוריך.
Moshe Mani, presently President of Ashkelon Academic College and formerly President of Tel Aviv University.
And Moshe is currently the chairman of the equivalent of VERA, the Council of College University Presidents.
For me personally, the whole affair has a sense of déjà vu. I remember in the 80s when I was president, Chaim Harari was chairman of the VATAT, we ran into similar troubles, not identical, but similar troubles. I think it should it should be safely said that Israeli higher education is severely under-budgeted. And therefore, all the people who are vying for part of that budget argue their case. No one can suspect me of being or having been anti-college at that time and pro-college now. I spawned, during my administration at Tel Aviv University, I spawned Tel Aviv Jaffa College in its first steps, and later on the Chulon Technical College. I think that everybody would agree, even Ze'ev and Yoshua, that if colleges did not exist, they would have to be invented at the present time. I do not think, I'm glad that we agree. I have no...
Ze'ev, I'll give you the last word.
I think that the colleges are doing their best in order to fill the gap that the budget restraints are dictating to the universities. And I think that there is no real conflict between universities and colleges and vice versa. We do not complement each other, but we complement each other, and we should never forget it. I believe that together we could orchestrate a higher education that is better than it is now. Insofar as research, I think that the subject has been belabored beyond necessity, because in the universities research will be done, it's part and parcel of university life. And those colleges that can allow and foster research within their boundaries, so much the better. I do not think that research is something that should be allowed only in the universities, and it is quite understandable that the VATAT cannot afford to finance research in the colleges. And for the time being, even speaking as chairman of the university college presidents, I accept this situation for the time being. Thank you.